Hey, welcome back. Tonight, the dead don't need money, but somehow in this line of work, they end up paying for a great deal of it anyway. You're not just hearing about medieval grave robbing, you're doing it shovel in hand, moon overhead, and considerably more nerve than sense. If you're enjoying these journeys into history, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight. Now let your body sink into stillness. Let your breathing slow and let's step into that world together. To understand what you're about to do, it helps to understand why anyone would agree to do it in the first place. Grave robbing isn't a career path most people wake up dreaming about. It's usually the last option left standing after every other one has quietly closed itself off. Money is the obvious answer, and it's largely the correct one. This work is dangerous, unpleasant, and deeply frowned upon by, well, essentially everyone, but it pays considerably better than most jobs available to someone in your position. Debt has a way of making moral objections feel like a luxury you can't currently afford. There's a specific market driving all of this, and it's not the one you might assume. Medical schools and private anatomists need bodies to study, actual human anatomy being somewhat difficult to teach convincingly from illustrations alone. The problem is that legal sources of bodies, mostly executed criminals, fall dramatically short of what these institutions actually need. Supply and demand, as it turns out, doesn't particularly care whether its subject matter is still breathing. This gap between what's needed and what's legally available creates exactly the kind of opportunity that people in difficult circumstances learn to notice. A surgeon willing to pay generously for a fresh body, no questions asked about where it came from, is the sort of arrangement that tends to find willing partners eventually, especially among those with few other ways to feed a family. You didn't arrive at this decision lightly. There were other jobs first, other attempts at getting by through more conventional means. But conventional means have a habit of running out precisely when you need them most, and eventually the choice narrows down to something uncomfortably simple. Do this or don't eat. Tonight, you've made your choice, and somewhere across town, a surgeon is already expecting delivery of exactly what you're about to go acquire. Not every grave will do, which is the first hard lesson anyone in this line of work learns quickly. Freshness matters enormously, both for the surgeon's purposes and, frankly, for your own ability to complete tonight's work without collapsing from the smell somewhere around hour 2. You've been watching the local churchyard for days now, the way someone else might watch a market for the best produce. Except the produce here is considerably more morbid, and the stakes considerably higher if you're seen doing the watching. Funerals draw crowds, and crowds draw attention, both useful and dangerous, depending on how you use them. A burial from earlier today is ideal. The ground still loose enough to dig quickly, the body fresh enough to still be worth the trip. You noted the location carefully during the service itself, standing respectfully at the edge of the gathered mourners, blending into the crowd the way you've learned to do. Grief being a remarkably effective disguise for someone with entirely different intentions. Wealthier families sometimes pose a problem having grown wise to exactly this kind of enterprise. Some now pay for watchmen to guard freshly dug graves through the first vulnerable nights. Others invest in iron cages called mort safes, locked directly over the burial site. An entire industry having sprung up specifically to thwart people doing precisely what you're about to attempt. Poorer burials, uncomfortably, tend to be easier targets. Fewer resources available for that kind of protection, fewer people checking in after the funeral concludes. It's not a detail you particularly enjoy thinking about. The uneven distribution of who gets protected and who doesn't extending, apparently, even into death itself. Tonight's target sits in a quieter corner of the churchyard. Unguarded, as far as you can tell, the loose earth still visible even in the dim moonlight. You've done your scouting. Now comes the considerably less comfortable part. Speed matters more than technique here, though a certain amount of technique still helps considerably. You've brought a shovel with a shortened handle, easier to conceal, easier to work with in tight quarters, and a smaller tool for the more delicate final stages. The kind of equipment nobody sells specifically for this purpose, but somehow always seems to exist anyway. You dig at the head of the grave rather than its full length, a trick that saves considerable time and effort. Just enough space to work, angled down toward where the coffin lid meets the body's shoulders. Every shovelful of earth gets placed carefully nearby, ready to be replaced quickly, because leaving obvious disturbance behind isn't just messy, it's practically a signed confession. The sound of digging feels impossibly loud in the stillness of a churchyard at night, every scrape of metal against soil seeming to announce itself to the entire sleeping town. You pause more than once, certain you heard something, some rustle beyond the trees that turns out, each time, to be nothing more than wind or your own overworked imagination. Reaching the coffin lie brings its own small relief, quickly replaced by the next challenge. Prying it open quietly requires patience. Your racing heart isn't particularly interested in providing. Wood creaks. You freeze. Nothing happens. You continue. What follows next isn't something most people spend much time imagining in detail. And you've learned not to, either. Not really. Efficiency helps here more than reflection does. The body is lifted, wrapped, moved quickly toward the edge of the grave. The entire process demanding a strange, practiced detachment that took considerably longer to develop than the physical technique itself. By the time the earth was shoveled back into place, smoothed over as best you can manage in darkness, you've been working for the better part of an hour. Every minute of it spent listening for footsteps that, so far, haven't come. The surgeon's back entrance is exactly where he said it would be. Unmarked, unremarkable, the kind of door you'd walk past 100 times without a second glance unless you knew precisely what happened on the other side of it after dark. He doesn't ask questions, which is, frankly, part of the arrangement's appeal for both of you. A quick inspection, a nod, a bag of coins changing hands with the same brisk efficiency you might expect from any other business transaction. If any other business transaction typically happened at 3 in the morning through a side door. This whole strange economy exists because medicine desperately needs bodies to study, and legal channels simply can't keep up with demand. Anatomy schools teach students how the human body actually works, muscles, organs, the intricate architecture beneath the skin. And none of that can be properly learned from diagrams alone, however detailed. Someone, somewhere, has to provide the real thing. The surgeons themselves rarely ask where their specimens originate. An arrangement of convenient, mutual silence that benefits everyone, except, obviously, the family who buried their loved one only hours ago, believing the matter settled. It's an uncomfortable thought you've learned to set aside quickly. The same way you've learned to set aside most uncomfortable thoughts this line of work generates. Payment tonight is generous, more than you'd earn in a week of whatever more respectable work you could find, assuming respectable work were currently available to you at all. You pocket the coins, already calculating how far they'll stretch, rent, food, perhaps a little set aside for whatever comes next. As you slip back out into the night, the empty road ahead feels marginally safer than it did an hour ago. Your task complete, your pockets heavier, and one uncomfortable, unavoidable fact settling in alongside the coins. You'll likely be doing this again soon enough. Fear doesn't announce itself politely in this line of work. It settles somewhere behind your ribs and stays there, a low, constant hum that never quite switches off, even on nights when nothing actually goes wrong. Watchmen have become an increasingly common problem, families paying to have someone stand guard over a fresh grave through its first vulnerable nights. Sometimes armed, always alert, occasionally trigger-happy, in ways that have ended badly for people in exactly your position. You've learned to scout thoroughly before committing to any particular churchyard. Though thorough scouting only reduces risk, it never quite eliminates it. Then there are the mort safes, iron cages bolted directly over graves, locked and heavy enough that even attempting to move one announces your presence louder than any accidental noise could. Entire families have invested considerable sums in these devices, an entire industry having grown up specifically to keep people like you out, which, from a certain grim perspective, is at least a form of professional recognition. You've had close calls before, tonight arguably being one of them. That rustle beyond the trees earlier, still sitting slightly uneasily in your memory even now. Other nights have been worse. A dog barking somewhere too close. A lantern light appearing where no lantern should be. The particular, specific terror of footsteps that aren't your own, growing louder rather than fading away. Getting caught doesn't simply mean an awkward conversation and a walk home. Communities that discover a grave disturbed tend to respond with fury that goes considerably beyond polite disapproval. Angry mobs having formed on more than one occasion for considerably less provocation than finding someone mid-crime in a churchyard at night. It's a strange kind of profession, one where the primary skill required isn't digging, or timing, or even nerve, though all of those help. It's the constant, exhausting work of staying quiet, staying careful, and staying just barely one step ahead of consequences that would very much like to catch up with you. It happens fast, the way these things always seem to. No warning at all before your heart is suddenly hammering somewhere up near your throat. A light flickers through the trees to your left, moving steadily, deliberately, exactly the way a lantern moves when someone's actually looking for something rather than simply passing by. You freeze completely, every instinct screaming to run, competing with the equally loud instinct that running is precisely what gets people caught. Stillness, you've learned, is its own kind of skill. Standing motionless in shadow while your entire body seems to vibrate with the effort of staying quiet. The light draws closer, a voice calling out now, low and questioning. The unmistakable tone of a watchman checking whether his suspicions are correct. You press yourself flatter against the nearest headstone, cold stone against your back, praying to whatever's listening that the shadows here are as thick as they feel. Footsteps crunch across frozen ground, agonizingly slow, agonizingly close. You can hear your own pulse now, loud enough that it seems impossible he can't hear it too. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, and the watchman's attention shifts just slightly, just enough. He mutters something to himself, the particular grumbling of someone who's decided the noise was probably nothing, probably an animal, probably not worth the trouble of a full search on a cold night like this one. The light begins to retreat, footsteps fading, moving back toward wherever he came from. You don't move for a long time after he's gone, counting your own breaths just to have something steady to focus on. Eventually, when your legs finally agree to cooperate again, you allow yourself to exhale properly for what feels like the first time in several minutes. Tonight was close. Tonight, you tell yourself, was also a reminder of exactly how quickly this could all go the other way. Not everyone who does this work gets to tell the story afterward, a truth that sits heavier some nights than others. Tonight being one of them, adrenaline still fading slowly from your system. You've heard the accounts, passed quietly between people in this line of work the way trade secrets usually are. A man 2 towns over, caught mid-dig by a grieving relative who'd stayed behind after everyone else went home. What happened next wasn't quick, and it wasn't merciful. Communities generally reserving their harshest reactions for exactly this particular crime. Public punishment, when the courts got involved instead of an angry crowd, tended toward humiliation as much as harm. Offenders, sometimes locked in stocks for public viewing, the townspeople invited, practically encouraged, to express their displeasure directly and often. Fines, when someone could actually pay them, still rarely matched the size of the community's outrage. Some stories end worse. Mob justice doesn't wait for magistrates, doesn't particularly care about proper procedure. And churchyards, it turns out, are exactly the kind of place people feel most entitled to defend violently. A few names get mentioned in hushed tones. Cautionary tallies told specifically to remind newcomers like you what's actually at stake here, beyond simply the money. And yet, despite all of this, the trade continues. Night after night, town after town, because the demand for bodies doesn't disappear just because the supply carries genuine risk. Someone will always be desperate enough, or bold enough, or simply out of better options, to keep doing exactly what you're doing right now. You think about all of this walking home tonight. Coins heavier in your pocket than your conscience currently feels, fully aware that the same fate those other names met remains entirely possible for you too, on some future night that hasn't happened yet, but easily could. Walking these quiet roads home, coins jingling faintly in your pocket, it's worth sitting for a moment with everything tonight actually asked of you. Not just the physical work, the digging, the lifting, the careful, quiet precision of it all, but the particular kind of nerve required to keep doing something, full well, could end very badly. There's an uncomfortable irony sitting at the center of this entire trade, one you've turned over in your mind more than once during nights like this. The same act that would horrify most of your neighbors, that would earn you their fury if discovered, is quietly enabling exactly the kind of medical knowledge that saves lives elsewhere. Somewhere, a student is learning anatomy tonight because of choices like yours. That thought doesn't make the work feel clean exactly, but it does make it feel less simple than most people assume. Desperation has a way of narrowing what feels possible, and yours narrowed considerably before it led you here. Perhaps that's the real story underneath tonight's events, not simply a man digging up a grave, but a system that left him few better options, and a trade willing to profit quietly from exactly that gap. You've made it home safely tonight, which is never entirely guaranteed in this line of work. Tomorrow or the night after or the one after that, you'll likely do this again, because coins spend quickly and rent doesn't care where the money came from. For now, though, exhaustion finally outweighs the fear. And sleep, when it comes, arrives heavier and more welcome than usual. And with that, tonight's journey through the quiet, dangerous world of the medieval grave robber comes to its close. Wherever you're listening from, whatever weight your own day carried, there's nothing left for you to dig up, nothing left for you to carry home. Just rest, waiting for you exactly where you are. No lantern light approaching, no need to stay alert a moment longer. Sleep now. Nobody's coming for you tonight.